Welcome to the Gender in Focus podcast. I'm Elle, and each week I get to ask Kai Scott, the president of Transfocus Consulting, all the questions you have ever wanted to ask about trans and non-binary people in the workplace and in the wider world.
We get a lot of questions especially from frontline workers, because they're so passionate about serving people and are really good at it too, that they're often like, what do I do? How do I handle this? And it's like, you got this.
There is a little bit of pressure to have like a solution on hand, like this is a problem and here's the solution, what do you think?
Right.
But actually this is really complex, and especially those more structural stuff, there's a lot of complexity to it, so you don't necessarily have to have all the answers in order to raise this.
In today's episode, we're flipping the script on what it means to be a leader. You don't need a fancy title or a corner office to spark change. Whether you're brand new or a seasoned staffer, you are a leader when you notice structural issues, speak up, and model more inclusive ways of working. We'll talk about how to spot patterns before they become problems, how to document and raise concerns effectively, and how small, thoughtful actions like trying something new or offering solutions can ripple outward. This one's for anyone who ever has thought, I see the problem, but I'm not sure if it's my place to fix it. Spoiler alert, it is. Let's get into it. And I'm joined by my coworker, Elle. Hello, Elle.
Hello, how are
How are you doing? Oh, I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing very well, thank you. It is pretty common for people who are not in leadership positions or like leadership roles to feel like totally powerless when it comes to kind of seeing changes and making those changes. And I guess that's really where I wanted to start. Like, why would you say that it is important to kind of challenge that narrative?
Yeah, there's this concept that if we don't have leader buy-in, we can't go forward, which I appreciate, right? Obviously, there can be, in some instances, costs involved or a particular direction that needs to be established before starting to gallantly go in a particular direction. But I will say that sometimes leaders are dealing with other things, or perhaps they don't really understand the depth of the issues, or they're not convinced yet of what is at play, and maybe they're dealing with a whole bunch of other stuff, right? So, I mean, it's not always coming from a malicious place or a dismissive place, but I will say that sometimes there's just the absence of leaders, the kind of more formal leadership roles. But there's so many people that see things on the ground day to day that really powerful connection to what's off or what's going well. And I just want to invite those people into the mix as well. And oftentimes they can kind of dismiss the importance of their role to the organization, to alert leaders of what's going on. And so I just really want to kind of empower folks to not hesitate or hold back just because leaders aren't quite there yet.
You said just then about how people who are kind of sort of on the ground on a day-to-day are really the ones who are seeing this more often. If you're like frontline staff, you're going to be experiencing these things in a lot sort of closer way. And so I was wondering if you could go into that, like what, especially like more structural stuff, what kind of structural things that frontline staff might notice or might have to deal with that would bring a kind of better insight to leadership if they were to lead or to go with that and explain it.
Yeah, it's such a good question because, there are frontline workers who are, dealing with customers or organizing fellow employees or a whole number of different things or roles and functions that they play. And the way that things are set up can either serve them in that role or make it more difficult for them. I mean, a very basic example is if you have a new client or a customer coming in and you're processing that person's name, their address, entering a bunch of information about them into a system, and that system isn't set up for, say, two first name fields, then unfortunately, a lot of frontline workers have a hard time respectfully interacting with folks because they're
Right.
just looking on somebody's ID and are like, okay, that's their name. But when in fact that's their past name, and they go by, a chosen name that they haven't legally updated yet, or
Hmm.
perhaps don't want to update legally. And
Right.
so it just, yeah, that presents a challenge. And then there's an interaction. People could become upset and say,
Hmm.
this is my real name. And not through any slight to the frontline worker, but just because of the way the system is set up, that frontline worker now has to deal with that situation, right? And some are
Right.
very creative and can figure something out on the fly. Others can, wonder what to do, but also be very hesitant and then just be like, my hands are tied. I'm sorry.
Hmm.
And so that's where frontline workers can really lead to say, hey, this is what came up last week, the month before. If you can get some numbers behind that, people can see just what scale of issue this is, and that more attention needs to be paid to these types of issues. Another example is washrooms. If you don't have enough options, then people are put in a very difficult position as trans and non-binary folks. And so, there's things that you can say. Hey, we had a non-binary person come by, and when there was only men's and women's washrooms, then they don't know where to go, and we can't support them in that access. So those
Hmm.
are just a few examples to illustrate what people are seeing on the ground that they can report up to other folks.
You mentioned in your intro that a lot of people don't feel like it's their place to do that,
Hmm.
and you just gave some examples then. But I wondered if you could go into the ways that people can bring this to their leader, if they're, especially if they're worried like it isn't their place to say something. Yeah, what are the kind of ways that people can bring that up?
Hmm. Yeah. So I appreciate why people hesitate.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Sometimes systems can be fairly either intimidating to figure out how to fix, or overwhelming, or maybe people think there's a cost associated with fixing something. And so it's not their decision to apply, money or resources to this.
Mm-hmm.
So they just may hang back, hold back. But actually, them letting leaders know, whether it's in an email that you send to your manager or supervisor, so one level up, to say, these are some of the things that I'm seeing on the ground, and they're quite persistent issues. It happened this many times,
Mm-hmm.
a week, a month, anything that gives them some sense of the how prevalent it is. Or
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's not prevalent, but it is a big issue, right? So it's very disruptive because of something. Maybe that trans or non-binary person decided not to come back, right? So that could have an impact on somebody's business if you have customers that are not coming back. And usually, if they have a bad experience, they might be sharing with others, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's having leaders be aware of what's happening via email. Also can raise during a meeting. Perhaps there are town halls in which you can kind of submit this, whether anonymously or attached to your name. Um, any number of channels to try to get this to information. As I will say, we typically at Transfocus get called in when enough of these have been raised by folks
Oh,
on the
really?
ground. So companies will come, well, we've heard, 5 complaints in the last month, and we realize we really need to do something. It seems to be
Mm-hmm.
getting worse. And so that's where, of course, it's not just Transfocus. There's plenty of other organizations also that can help. But this just gives you an idea of kind of connecting the dots for folks. And leaders may not always know what's happening on the ground to be able
Mm-hmm.
to be aware. But once it's been raised to them, and they realize, okay, this is there's a few different things at play, and just how often it happens, it really can help kind of jump them into action.
That's so interesting that it happens like that. You'll get called in after like multiple people have mentioned this. And I find that really interesting because
Yeah.
it's sort of, I think maybe, or maybe this is just me, but I always feel a little self-conscious if I'm bringing a problem up that I
Mm,
don't have a solution to. Like,
right.
I'd always feel like I'm just complaining, and I just feel like there may be, or maybe it is just me, but there is a little bit of pressure to have like a solution
Mm,
on
mm,
hand, like this is a problem and here's the solution. What do you think?
right.
Um, but actually, this is really complex, and especially those more structural stuff.
Yeah.
There's a lot of complexity to it, so you don't necessarily have to have all the answers in order to raise
Mm.
this.
No, absolutely not. In fact, one of the things I say during education sessions that as frontline staff, you're not responsible. Obviously, some people can be creative in the moment to create a like to develop a workaround. That's okay,
Hmm.
right? You want to kind of the best you can address it in the moment, to say, okay, this is kind of a temporary fix while we
Hmm.
sort it out long term. But by then raising it with leaders, then they can take the action for the long term piece, and I think that's key. And that, but yeah, I appreciate people are a bit self conscious. I
Hmm.
can totally relate. I want to be kind of solutions oriented, but I think there's value in saying, "Hey, leader, I these things or this thing came up, and I developed this workaround so that we're okay for the moment. We
Hmm.
kind of stabilize things, so that shows you have initiative, and you try to solve it in the moment, and then that gives the leader some view as to how that could be solved more long term, even if it's not carbon copy, it at least starting in the right direction, right?
Hmm.
And you're not expected to know exactly how things should be solved
Right.
long term because they are complex. There's a lot of trade offs in the solutions going forward, and it is best to involve uh, various departments and explore the options and whatnot. But I think interim solutions are a really powerful catalyst. So not to diminish just because they're short term that they don't mean anything, that you
Yeah.
can highlight your initiative. Yeah.
How can we raise concerns in a way that feels like constructive rather
Mm,
than like confrontational? Because
right.
I think a lot of people maybe worry about receiving backlash for bringing this up. And well, I I would, I think, if I was in a
Sure.
different job.
Yeah, that's a really good question because we want people to be able to raise these issues without it impacting their day-to-day work or how the leader views that person, right?
Hmm.
And I think it's really key to come with like, hey, you may or may not know this, but these are some of the things I'm observing, and I understand our organization to have these values, and I want to help the organization live up to those values. So
Mm.
that's a very constructive way to say it. It's just like we have this mission or this vision, and because of these things that may not be on the radar, like you don't expect the leader to know everything. It's just like, hey, heads up. Um, and in a way that is not shaming or blaming that individual or set of people who don't know, because oftentimes it's just not on companies' radars. Also, another thing to add into the mix is that usually this is also happening at other organizations. This is not
Hmm.
something unique to this particular organization. Like they're uniquely awful to trans and
Right.
non-binary people. It's just the way we've set things up in society, and but that also allows for course correction. So just a few of those kind of stylistic approaches can really help leaders receive that information uh, as the constructive input that it is, right?
Mhm.
And if you have leaders, even though you've thoughtfully constructed and sent this with good vibes, and you
Right.
still get kind of thrown under the bus, that might be a larger cultural issue rather than
Mm.
specific to that individual. So it might be its own test. But yeah.
You said something a couple of minutes ago, and I don't know if you can say more on
Mm,
this, but I did want to bring it up just in case there is,
mm,
which was about you mentioned the documentation of these
right.
issues.
Hmm.
And I wanted to ask you about like the importance of that and
Mm.
why keeping track of this is like why that works or why that's important.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question because it is really important. Leaders often make decisions from quantitative information. So that means numbers.
Mm,
They want to know the scale of things. They want to know, you know, as much detail as possible to effectively understand, but pretty quickly understand as well. It's like 10-page report doesn't quite help, but
right.
a 1 or 2 page thing with some supporting information. So anytime something happens, it's valuable to write it either in a document or in a spreadsheet if you're so inclined, to say, this was the date, this is the people involved. If you know the identities, or that they use they them pronouns as an example, or um, you know eh, also just the nature of the issue that arose, and the kind of category of thing. Was it a washroom related issue? Was it an information system? Was it about communications? Just something where you can have, some categories that,
Hmm.
and they don't have to be perfect, right? Just some rough categories that allow folks to see just, what scale we're talking about, and in different areas, because it pops up in different areas.
Hmm.
And collect that over 1 or 2, 3 months, just to see how often it happens, especially if you're dealing with a lot of customers, then, or people in general. That can be really helpful, just and if it's such like a really fast reoccurring issue, I would just have a tally, even just
Right.
be like, this person complained about washrooms number 10. Like, if it's really fast, that's one approach that you can quickly capture, and then be like, look, over the last 1 month we had 15 washroom complaints. Like, that's really big cause for concern.
Hmm.
And would be very powerful to hear.
Yeah. How can, like, how, oh, I don't know what my question is here, but as a leader,
Mhm.
receiving that information, like,
Well, I like where you're going with this, in the sense that sometimes people are collecting information, um, based on how they've experienced it. And then there's the other step of the leader interpreting or kind of consuming the data. And
hmm.
I don't think it's about kind of the end all be all of, the full, blow by blow of what it was. It's more just like a bell that you're
Hmm.
alerting the leader to, and then they need to go, if they're inspired to then collect more specific data that speak to what they need, right? So
Mm.
you're just getting the ball rolling by observing and collecting a few kind of key pieces of information. Doesn't have to be perfect, but enough to send that on to a leader, to them then being like, okay, now we got to start something official. And
Hmm.
that's where, like, say, for example, when Transfocus gets involved, we conduct an inventory of washrooms. We like look over the documents, and we have a very kind of methodical approach that then gives us the precise, exact details that are needed, to
Hmm.
then make proper decisions. So it's really just getting started, with this kind of initial set of observations and information that's collected.
And I would assume then that as somebody who's a sort of more the frontline staff,
Hmm.
making an effort to collect this information and kind of document all of this would like model that for other people too. So you're more
Mm-hmm.
likely to get more information and more evidence put together.
Absolutely. In fact, if you work across departments as a frontline staff, and can say, hey, I'm collecting this information here, are you encountering similar issues, or perhaps different issues, and this is what I'm doing to collect that information. I'm happy to share what I've put together in case it's useful for you, and then you can help inspire others to also similarly pay attention to these types of issues. And maybe they're just not, it's not on their radar, and then they go, oh, I didn't even think about it, and now
Hmm.
they're paying attention to those things, and can actually see them. Sometimes people don't see issues because they don't know that they're occurring even right in front of their eyes. So yeah,
Hmm.
it is helpful to
And
share with others.
It's like one of those things where as soon as someone does point it out, that's all you see now. Like,
True.
I definitely feel like I have that since joining Transfocus.
Oh,
Like, it's
really? Oh,
all
no.
I see now. Yeah.
Washroom signs.
And I felt like I was pretty conscious of it before, but it's
Mm.
ramped up. So
Oof.
yeah, I can imagine that
Yeah.
modeling that behavior will really increase that for others.
Mhm. Yeah, become little gender detectives that, go
Exactly.
around with their magnifying glasses, eyeing different things.
Can I ask you, you told me a story once about you doing this in
Mm.
your, is it your running club? I can't remember what
Ah,
it was.
yes. Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
Vancouver front
oh,
runners.
front runners, that was it. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
Um, can I? Is it all right if I ask you about that and like if you could share that? I
for
love this
sure.
story.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So this is in the spirit of, if you see something, it's not only saying something, but it's also trying something. So can appreciate that there's exclusion even if unintended. In my example with the Vancouver Frontrunners, we have a race, or they I'm no longer with the Frontrunners, but when I was, we had a race, and they still have the race, the Pride Run. Every year it happens in July, and it's this really fun community event. And before, they just had two race categories, men and women, and that wasn't enough for the full spectrum of gender identities. And so I said, hey, why don't we add a third race category to honor those who are non-binary and give them a space to participate, and if they want to race, to see how they stack up against others. And of course, always fun, because it's not too serious, but still
Hmm.
it's a way of recognizing, especially there's podium, celebrations afterwards for first to third place. And so yeah, we added that as a race category because I think it was really important to try that out. Because sure, within front runners, it's more of a community race, it's not really serious, but we could be a fertile testing ground for other races that perhaps are a little bit more serious, right, and
Hmm.
more competitive. And it was a jumping off place. So even if you're within a department, you can, amongst yourselves, at a fairly small scale, of course, no costs associated with it. Certain things do require costs, but test out things, because then you can easily demonstrate the effectiveness of something, or to say, hey, the sky didn't fall when we did it this way. Because oftentimes leaders are nervous to change things, which I
Hmm.
appreciate, right? Going with the status quo is pretty easy, even if it's not fulfilling everybody's needs. But then change requires, effort and bringing people along and addressing complaints and whatnot. So I see why people steer clear of change, or kick it down the road sometimes. But if
Sure.
you're able to just demonstrate in a small group like we did with Vancouver Frontrunners, you can then share it with other organization or other departments. In your example, as a frontline worker, or in our instance, we shared that with other races, and then inspired them to add a third race category as well. And it's been growing since then. And now a lot of races have a third race category. I'm not saying just because of front runners, don't want to over exaggerate our practice here, or exploration. I think it's a wider pattern that's happening, but
Hmm.
just that there's value in trying something out, and then even documenting that to say this
Hmm.
was what worked well, and this is where we didn't quite get what we needed. Maybe we need to continue to tweak that, and we also needed to tweak the race categories as well, so it's not kind of uh, just one and done. It might be an evolving thing.
I love that story because I really love that idea of that you were talking about just giving something a go, like just see if it
Yeah.
works, and if it doesn't, then that's information too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I really I don't really know what my question is here, but I wanted you to go into that a little bit when it comes to leadership and receiving this information from frontline staff, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe if they have suggestions. there is that you were saying about how people can be a bit hesitant to have that change. And so
Mm.
I was wondering if you could speak to that and like the role that leadership can have on just giving things a go.
Yeah, absolutely. So an example of that within the workplace is if there's a, say a washroom that you don't have enough options,
Mm-hmm.
and you could introduce temporary signage, right? And of course, you want to make sure everybody in that office, is aware. You don't want
Are you
just
sure?
one day have a different sign, and then people are really confused. But more just to say, hey, in a team meeting, how about, we have a single unit washroom. It's labeled for women right now. What if we, had that for anybody? And
Mm-hmm.
then it's more accessible for a variety of different people. And, it's really important. And we'll just try it out and then see and then reflect on it, right? So it's not that this is forever in a day. It's just like you're going to try it out together, and then it's a process of you discussing it and reflecting it, or maybe an anonymous survey. I mean, I don't know how far you want to go with the data collection. Hashtag data nerd here. But you know what I mean? Just like
Mm-hmm.
get people involved. And because it's not permanent, there's perhaps not as much of a backup or a lot of
Mm.
concerns. It just be like, we want to explore this, and everybody has a say, and we're going to figure this out together. And then you can share that process after, however many a time period you want to test it out. And then say to the other floors, the other offices, however big your company is, hey, we tried this out and this is what worked. This is what we want to continue to tweak. What about doing this elsewhere?
Mm-hmm.
Was that your question, by the way? I don't know if I was
I think so.
answering.
I think I just asked. I think you answered it. I think I just
Okay.
asked about, as a leader, hearing suggestions or just getting this information,
Mm.
how you can, like there's so much
Oh,
hesitation, like you can just
right,
try, like it's nothing's permanent, you're
right.
not literally bulldozing the building and redesigning it.
Well, especially if a department is pretty keen, like why quell that enthusiasm or that
Mm,
initiative? Like if somebody is or a set of people are so passionate to want to make things better in an organization, and they all are on board to try this out, like that's a really beautiful thing. That speaks well to the culture. And as a leader, I would want to continue to cultivate that and even celebrate them, to be like, thank you for
mhm.
knowing the issue, looking at some possible solutions, and then taking action. Like, holy smokes, that's amazing. Yeah.
I also think that, like, and I might go off on a tangent here, so I'll try not to, but I
Okay.
also think that it's quite powerful for people who maybe are against the idea to just try it and like
Hmm.
not push back and not be against trying it, because if
Yeah.
you're right and it's going to be a disaster, then you'll have the evidence for that.
Yeah.
So it is actually super powerful, even if you disagree with it, to give it a go.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point, and one that, if somebody is a frontline worker is taking kind of charge is maybe not the right word, but leading this thing
Mm,
is to bring people alongside of being like, this will be revealed if it's not a good idea, right?
right. Yeah.
And or you might be surprised by things that you
Hmm.
discover along the way, like just being open to possibilities,
Hmm.
and not having to kind of have a particular outcome in mind and be gunning for some direction. It's more like, let's just figure it out, like,
Hmm.
and and write it down too, so that we can kind of look at it together. And I hope for a lot more exploration rather
Hmm.
than people digging into things, because
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to acknowledge. Washrooms being one example. It's a pretty easy one to anchor in, but
Yeah.
there's others. But that there's a lot to be gained, no matter who one is, to better understand these things. Because washrooms on the surface looks really simple. It's just like, well, do this, do that, should be done, right? It's like, well,
Hmm.
no, actually, so much going on in washrooms, at least that I've been able to observe. It's such a culturally laden place that I think we all need to pay a little more attention to it. And if people, again, it's a small group. We don't want to make this like a massive thing, unless
Right.
it's more official. But the smaller I find, the better to have it kind of worked out. And it's not like you're going to solve everything, right? It's not world
Mhm.
peace after this, right? So, I mean, I wish,
Sure.
but it, that the process itself yields far more than just the solutions.
Mhm. Do you have any sort of, like, as we're wrapping this up, any kind of thoughts or further thoughts on the fact that we don't have to be in leadership roles in order to take initiative and to kind of lead by example with this?
Mm. Yeah. Uh, this has been, yeah, really interesting to kind of unpack and hopefully unlock some of the hesitation or reservations for people to take initiative in their own organizations, that they play a very powerful role. So for some, they can kind of dismiss that a bit.
Mm,
And I'm like, no, actually, of course, everybody has their own specific role. But I find frontline workers in particular have this tremendous insight that many others don't. And so just making sure we can, bring that into the equation so that folks feel that they can participate, because we get a lot of questions of, especially from frontline workers, because they're so
mhm,
passionate about serving people and are really good at it too, that they're often like, what do I do? How do I handle this? And it's like, you got this. You
mhm.
have such an important role to play. And it's just kind of connecting a few of the dots, offering some options. You might find your own different way from what we've just described, and just really inviting folks into the change making process as an important initiator of that within an organization. So that's my invitation. I'd love to hear from folks as they kind of figure out their footing on in this regard. If you do have some examples where it turned out really well based on that initiative, we'd love to hear about those examples. Whether it's emailing us at podcast@transfocus.ca, or any of the social media platforms that we're on. We'd love to hear from you on that.
Thank you so much, Kai. This
Yeah,
has been quite
absolutely.
interesting.
Yeah, and thank you as well. And yeah, I really enjoyed the opportunity just to kind of think that through, and hopefully that's helpful to the folks listening.
I hope so. I'll see you later then. Bye.
Okay, bye for now.